The sun hung low as Inigo and Lyra rode at the head of the procession, their path winding through the capital's northern gate. Word of their triumph had already spread, galloping faster than any horse. By the time the first banner of Ironmark crossed into the city, the streets were already lined with thousands of citizens. Children waved ribbons. Bakers threw flower petals from their stalls. From high balconies, nobles and scholars alike watched with folded hands and parted lips. "They look at you like you're not from this world," Lyra murmured, her bow slung over her shoulder. Inigo, dressed in clean leathers with his tactical vest polished and patched, kept his expression calm. The Apache helicopter had been left at the outskirts under heavy guard. He'd insisted it not enter the city walls. "I'm not," he said softly. "But I'm here now. So I guess that makes me responsible." A trumpet blared ahead. The King's Guard rode in formation, their silver armor gleaming in the afternoon light. At the head of them, Duke Volan of the East held the banner of House Aurelian, gold on red, fluttering with pride. As the heroes approached the palace steps, a hush fell across the crowd. The gates opened wide. Out came the royal herald, dressed in crimson robes, scroll in hand. "By decree of His Majesty King Aldrin III of House Aurelian, ruler of the unified realms and defender of the flame, let it be known." The voice echoed like thunder. "That the red Wyrm of Emberreach, long the scourge of the mountains and destroyer of our border holds, has been defeated through the valor of two souls, the brave Lady Lyra and the foreign warrior Inigo of the Skyfire." Inigo winced slightly at the title. "Skyfire," he whispered. Lyra smirked. "They had to call you something." The herald continued, "Let these two be brought before the king for commendation and honor befitting such a feat." Guards stepped forward and motioned for them to ascend. The staircase was long, white marble steps leading up to the ceremonial dais before the palace doors. At the top, beneath a tall canopy of carved oak and stone, stood King Aldrin himself, tall, lean, bearded, his crown a sharp angular thing of silver and obsidian. Beside him sat Queen Morella, adorned in a robe of emerald and gold, her hands folded in her lap. Inigo and Lyra climbed slowly, step by step. The plaza behind them stretched with people. Each eye watched in silence, as though recording every movement for memory and song. At the top they knelt as was customary. King Aldrin raised a hand. "Rise." They obeyed. The king studied Inigo first. "You arrived from the sky. You brought with you a weapon no man here could craft. A beast of steel that roared louder than dragons. Tell me, Inigo, what are you?" Inigo hesitated. Then he answered plainly. "A soldier, your majesty. From a town far away. I come bearing no kingdom, no flag, only my will to survive and help those I can." The king's gaze did not falter. "You ask for no land. No titles. And yet you've slain a threat our ancestors failed to tame for centuries." "I didn't do it alone," Inigo said, motioning to Lyra. "She fought with me. She stood by me from the start." A murmur passed through the court. Many had dismissed Lyra as just another ranger. Few knew her true skill until now. The queen leaned forward. "Then you are not a knight of any order, Lady Lyra?" "No, your grace," Lyra said. "Only a hunter. And a friend." The king nodded slowly. "Then it is time you were more than that." He gestured to the steward, who approached with a golden scroll and a sword in both hands. "By my will," Aldrin declared, "I name you Lyra of Windfell, first knight of the Emberwatch, sworn protector of the North and the High Flame. Let it be known that this title shall pass through your bloodline, and your name shall be recorded in the Book of Flame for all generations hence." Gasps followed the pronouncement. Lyra's jaw tightened, her lips trembling for a moment. "I..." She knelt again. "I am honored beyond words, your majesty." The king placed the flat of the blade upon her shoulder, then the other. "Rise, Ser Lyra." As she did, Inigo noticed the way she stood, shoulders back, chest high. Not just proud, fulfilled. Then the king turned to him. "And you, Inigo of Skyfire, you ask for no reward. But I am a king. I cannot allow such valor to go without recognition." The steward returned again, this time with a sealed box of obsidian. Inside, a badge crafted in the shape of the rising sun, rimmed in blue metal foreign to this land. "This metal," the king said, "was forged from the remains of the dragon's scale you shattered. Our smiths say your machine's fire cracked it like glass. We have never seen such power. He stepped forward. I name you Warden of the Skies, Inigo. You may serve no king, but all who fly shall know your banner. And your presence in my realm shall forever be honored and protected. He pinned the medal to Inigo's chest, just above the reinforced strap of his vest. The crowd erupted in cheers. Drums sounded from the towers. Horns blasted from every balcony. Flower petals rained from baskets on rooftops. Even the palace guards raised their weapons in salute. Lyra turned to him with a grin. Skyfire, huh? Don't get used to it. I already have. As the formalities ended, the royal musicians began to play. The king waved his hand and the palace gates opened wide. A feast awaits, the herald announced, in honor of the slayers of the Red. The crowd began to move, a wave of color and voices. Tables had been set throughout the inner courtyards. Meat and mead, fruit and flame-roasted boar. Dancers and jesters filled the air with music and laughter. But Inigo hung back. He walked to the edge of the high courtyard wall, looking toward the horizon again, toward Emberreach. Lyra joined him, sipping from a goblet. Thinking about her? Yeah, he admitted. I didn't kill her. And I don't know if that was the right choice. Lyra was quiet for a while. Then she said, You gave her the choice to stop. If she comes back, you'll do what you have to. I hope it doesn't come to that. They stood in silence for a while, watching the sun begin to dip past the peaks. You know what's strange? Inigo finally said. What? This place is starting to feel real. Lyra looked up at him. That's because you're no longer a stranger. You earned your place here. With us. He gave a faint smile. Then the king's steward called them back toward the inner court, where their seats waited beside the royal family. Come on, Warden of the Skies, Lyra teased. You can brood later. They turned, stepping back into the light of the palace, where songs of their battle had already begun to be sung. The inner courtyard of the palace had been transformed into a glittering spectacle. Tapestries of deep crimson and gold hung from the marble arches. Lanterns swayed above, enchanted to dance like fireflies. Courtiers in their finest silks mingled with guards still in half-polished armor. Servants moved swiftly between the columns, trays piled with roasted meats, fruits, cheeses, and goblets of amber mead. At the center sat a grand banquet table with King Aldrin and Queen Morella presiding. To the king's immediate right sat Inigo. Beside him, Lyra adjusted the new silver cloak draped over her shoulders, the official mark of her knighthood. It itches, she whispered. Looks good though, Inigo replied, slicing into a haunch of venison. I'd rather wear bark and furs again. Across the table, a plump baron leaned toward the queen, whispering something with a sly smile. The queen nodded politely, though her gaze kept drifting back to Inigo. So did half the courts. It was clear now that this wasn't just a feast, it was also a spectacle. A statement. The outsider had won their war. And now the realm wanted to claim him as their own. Are you used to this? Lyra asked under her breath. No, Inigo muttered. Back home I was nobody. Just another guy in a uniform. Now I've got kings and nobles eyeing me like a prize horse. Or a weapon. Same thing in their eyes. Suddenly a voice rang out, a clear baritone. High King. If I may. All turned as Duke Halvar of the Western Reach rose, goblet in hand. A veteran noble with a square jaw and silvered hair, his presence alone commanded attention. Tonight we celebrate victory not only over the Red W, he declared, but over fear itself. For centuries the dragon ruled our skies. But now, a man has come from beyond the stars, and with our own Lady Lyra, they struck it down. Applause followed. The Duke raised his cup to Inigo. I propose we make his stay permanent. A hush fell. King Aldrin raised an eyebrow. Permanent, Duke Halvar. Yes, your majesty. Let the man choose his own estate. Lands, title, vassals. Let him build a legacy here. He's proven himself more than worthy. Inigo's jaw tightened. He felt Lyra glance at him. Before he could speak, a younger noble, a marquis from the southern plains, stood up. I agree. Let us grant him lordship over Emberreach. Rebuild it in his name. A citadel of skyfire to protect the realm. More voices joined in. A fortress. A new order of knights. Make him a duke. The king raised a hand and the clamor ceased. Inigo, Aldrin said calmly. What say you? The eyes of the court turned once again to the man from another world. Inigo rose from his seat slowly, his plate untouched, the goblet near his elbow still full. He took a moment to find his words. I didn't come here for power, he began. Or land. Or titles. I came here because I crashed through the sky and landed in a forest. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the back rows. I've fought wars, he continued. I've flown machines across continents. I've seen what happens when men with too much ambition reach for too much authority. He paused, eyes scanning the crowd. I'm honored, truly. But I don't want a crown. I want purpose. He looked toward Lyra. And right now, my purpose is beside her. Lyra blinked, caught off guard. A faint smile crept up her lips. I'll help where I can, Inigo went on. I'll protect what needs protecting. I'll fight again if I must. But I don't need marble walls or a gold seal to do that. King Aldrin nodded slowly. Then you shall have neither, unless you ask. The nobles, disappointed but not insulted, began to murmur among themselves. As Inigo sat back down, Lyra elbowed him lightly. You handled that well. I half expected them to throw me into a political marriage. They still might. Watch out for the Duchess of Rent. I saw her eyeing me. Lyra chuckled. The music began again, a slow ballad played by strings and flute. Dancers took to the lower hall. Bards whispered lyrics about dragons and steel steeds. Wine flowed like water. Hours passed. As the moon climbed high above the palace towers, Inigo and Lyra eventually slipped away from the feast, their bellies full and their minds heavy with everything that had transpired. They wandered into the palace garden, torches lining the stone paths. Roses and night lilies bloomed in glowing clusters. Lyra leaned against a fountain's edge, dipping her hand in the cool water. So, she said, no lordship. No tower. Me. And a war machine. Inigo laughed quietly. Sounds about right. Do you miss home? He hesitated. I don't know what home even means anymore. The wind rustled the leaves. A lone nightbird sang in the trees. You could make one here, she said gently. Maybe, he murmured. But not in a castle. Not behind velvet ropes. He turned to her. You've been with me since day one. When I didn't know how to survive in this place. When everything was strange. You were the only thing that made sense. Lyra met his gaze. So what now? He pulled a folded parchment from his jacket, an official seal from the Royal War Office. While we were at the feast, this was slipped to me. Quietly. No fanfare. Lyra raised an eyebrow. What is it? A request. From the King's Marshal. Scouts spotted strange movements beyond the northern rift. Something big. Rumors of tunneling beasts. Monsters we haven't catalogued yet. Another quest? Inigo nodded. A dangerous one. Lyra smirked. I'm in. He tucked the letter away. You're sure? I'm a knight now, remember? I don't sit in halls and sip wine. I draw steel. Inigo looked out toward the stars. Then back at her. Let's leave at dawn. She stood beside him. Together. Always. Well, I'd like to ride on that metal beast of yours soon. You will soon. The Apache's rotors gradually slowed as Inigo guided the helicopter down toward a narrow plateau nestled between ridges. It wasn't ideal. Steep drop-offs lined either side and rocky outcrops dotted the uneven ground, but it was the only suitable place for miles. The low hum of the machine's turbine engines faded as he eased the craft down, skids touching the surface with a muted clank. Lyra braced herself against the frame, watching the terrain rise to meet them. Her knuckles were still white from gripping the console's edge. Flying was one thing. This was something else entirely. With a hiss, the canopy popped open, releasing a gust of warm air that carried the scent of singed oil, scorched metal, and wilderness pine. We're out? She asked, glancing over. Nearly, Inigo replied, stepping down from the cockpit. Fuel's below reserve. Can't push it further. He moved with practiced familiarity, already activating the maintenance interface tucked beneath the right landing skid. Lyra followed, eyes scanning the strange contraption's underbelly, watching the landing gear compress against the uneven rock. You said this thing doesn't run on magic, she muttered. It doesn't. He gave her a small grin. But it might as well be. He swiped open his system panel invisible to her and navigated the Freedom Shop. A dozen fuel types appeared, but he narrowed it quickly. Item: J8 Military Aviation Fuel. Type: Kerosene-based turbine fuel. Volume: 500 liters. Price: 8,000 tokens. Status: Purchase. Remaining balance: 1,245,633 tokens. Inigo confirmed with a mental command. A pulse of blue light shimmered beside the Apache's rear stabilizer, and with a soft hum, a modular fuel container materialized, shaped perfectly to dock with the onboard intake valve. He turned to Lyra, who stared slack-jawed. Was that summoning? You could call it that. I call it buying, Inigo said, crouching and attaching the container's nozzle. This fuel doesn't exist in your world, so I have to bring it in when needed. You just called it out of the air? No. I paid for it. He clicked the valve into place and flicked a switch on the container. The hum of liquid flowing through reinforced tubing filled the clearing. Lyra approached the tank with cautious reverence, then pointed at the gauges on the side of the Apache. What does this all mean? Pressure, temperature, fuel level, exhaust output, and turbine cycles. Inigo wiped sweat from his brow. It's like watching a heartbeat but mechanical. He peered at the interface again. So this machine, your Apache, it drinks fire? In a way. The fuel combusts inside the turbine engines. That turns rotors. The blades cut air, generate lift. She glanced upward, tracing the blade's arc in her mind. Like wings. Better, he said. Because wings don't roar like this. He tapped the side of the fuselage affectionately. Lyra nodded slowly, as though placing it within a mental framework. And these controls, they're like spell gestures? Sure, he smiled. Except every spell here is mechanical, repeatable, and deadly. She blinked. Deadly like your Thunderlance? The Hydra rocket pods? He chuckled. Yeah. Among other things. The fuel tank beeped. Fully transferred. He detached the nozzle, sealed the cap, and watched the container vanish into light particles. Auto-despawn after delivery use. That never gets old, he muttered. They both stood there for a moment, listening to the wind rattle through distant trees. The sound of birds had returned. The dragon's reign was over, at least for now. Lyra's voice came softly. Your world, it made all this? It took us centuries. Wars. Mistakes. A lot of lives lost. But yeah. We made machines like this to fight battles too big for swords. She stared into the cockpit. It's overwhelming. You'll get used to it. No, she said. But I'll learn. If you'll teach me. He turned to her, surprised by the seriousness in her eyes. You want to learn how to fly this? Not yet, she said with a smile. But someday. He nodded. I'll hold you to that. They spent the next few minutes running diagnostic checks. The HUD blinked green across all key systems. Turbines read steady. Ammunition slightly depleted but still combat-ready. The Apache was a monster, and it was hungry but operational. Lyra took a step closer to the pilot seat. She placed her hand on the edge of the cockpit and peered in again. There's more to this than just weapons, isn't there? Inigo smiled faintly. Yeah. There's freedom. Silence passed between them. Then a soft growl rumbled in Lyra's stomach. Inigo glanced at her. Hungry. She blushed. I didn't eat during the ceremony. He opened a side compartment and pulled out a vacuum-packed ration bar. Not the best, but it's food. She took it, inspecting the strange foil wrap before peeling it open. It smells salty? Soy and meat blend. High protein. Keeps soldiers alive when there's nothing else. She bit into it, chewing slowly. It's edible. He laughed. That's the highest compliment it's ever gotten. They ate in silence, seated on a pair of rocks overlooking the burned valley below. From here, the trail of scorched earth left behind by the dragon was plain to see. Blackened treelines, ash-covered craters, the twisted remains of a mountain she'd crashed into. It's a reminder, Inigo said, finishing his bar. That power without direction only leaves ruin. Lyra glanced sideways. Then what gives your power direction? He looked down at his hands, calloused from a world long gone. You. She blinked. I don't belong here. But you keep me grounded, he said. Remind me what's worth protecting. Her fingers brushed his for a moment before she looked away, cheeks reddening. "You're still weird." He grinned. "Takes one to know one." The Apache let out a soft chime, fuel systems fully pressurized, ready for takeoff. He stood, dusting himself off. "Time to move," he said. "There's still a lot of sky left." Lyra stood too. "Where are we going?" He looked west toward distant spires of smoke and glints of steel in the far valleys. "Wherever the next problem is." She smirked. "So, everywhere?" "Pretty much." He climbed into the cockpit, offered her a hand and helped her up. As the rotor spun to life again, the clearing became a blur of dust and sound. The plateau trembled under the renewed force of blades slicing air. This time Lyra didn't flinch. The Apache soared westward over the ridgelines, its rotors thrumming like the heartbeat of a metal beast against the open sky. Inigo sat focused at the controls, eyes scanning the landscape through his heads-up display. The horizon stretched far ahead, rolling forests, winding rivers, and the occasional distant settlement dotting the valleys like forgotten pearls. Lyra sat behind, no longer clutching the seat with wide eyes. She had grown more comfortable with the rumble of the engine, the sway of the helicopter, and even the way the terrain rushed past beneath them. But when Inigo's gaze narrowed, she noticed. "What is it?" she asked, leaning slightly forward. He tapped a button on his side display, zooming in with the camera pod mounted beneath the nose. Through it he saw movement, erratic, fast and wrong. Fire licked at the edges of small wooden houses. Smoke curled skyward, staining the horizon. "A village," he said. "And it's under attack." Lyra pressed her hand to the glass, peering down. "Goblins," she muttered, voice filled with disgust. "Look at the way they move, scattered, reckless." "Small green figures," Inigo said, toggling infrared. "Yeah. Not friendly." Without waiting, he shifted the Apache into a sharp tilt. The machine dipped low, slicing through the sky toward the smoke. As they approached, the full scene unfolded beneath them. Dozens of goblins poured through the village, torches in hand, crude iron weapons glinting in the firelight. Farmers ran, some dragging children behind them. A few guards fought valiantly near the central well, hopelessly outnumbered. A cry echoed up from below, raw, desperate. Lyra clenched her fists. "They'll kill everyone." "Not today," Inigo muttered. He flicked a switch. Arming Hydra pods. The targeting reticle snapped to life on his HUD, framing clusters of goblins darting between burning homes. "Hold tight." Fush. A pair of Hydra rockets screamed from the side of the Apache, trailing smoke and fire as they arced downward. The explosion rocked the village outskirts. A ball of flame engulfed one mob of goblins, sending limbs and weapons flying. The others screamed, scattering like rats. Lyra winced at the impact, but she didn't look away. "You weren't lying when you said your world made weapons to fight monsters." Inigo nodded grimly. "And I'm just getting started." He switched to the 30mm chain gun, aiming through the helmet-linked targeting system. With a twist of the stick, the gun aligned. Brr. A 3-second burst carved a trench through the goblin horde, spraying dirt, blood, and fire. The remaining creatures screamed in alarm, now realizing they were being hunted from the sky. Some tried to flee. Others raised bows, but they were primitive, useless against the steel dragon hovering above. Inigo kept circling, sweeping the village perimeter to prevent escape. "Lyra, can you see if anyone's still fighting back?" She leaned toward her side panel, eyes scanning the streets below. "There," she shouted, pointing. "Near the granary. A boy with a pitchfork, he's cornered." Inigo adjusted his angle. The boy was perhaps 12, facing down a goblin 3 times his size. Its crude axe rose high. "Not for long." Brr. The chain gun barked again. The goblin was ripped apart mid-swing, vanishing in a spray of green and red. The boy fell backward, unharmed. "He's safe," Lyra said, relief flooding her voice. The Apache continued its deadly ballet in the sky. Rockets flared, machine gun fire cracked across the wind, and the goblins broke ranks. Some tried to flee into the woods, but a few more rockets turned the treeline into a funeral pyre. Within 5 minutes, the goblin force had crumbled. Bodies lay scattered across the fields, some still twitching. The fire still burned, but the worst was over. Inigo pulled up slightly, letting the Apache hover above the smoke. "We're clear." He exhaled slowly. We just saved an entire village. Lyra watched the figures below emerge from hiding. Farmers, mothers, elderly men. Their faces were streaked with soot and ash, but their eyes looked upward with something deeper than fear. Reverence. They think we're a god, she whispered. Inigo shook his head. Just people. With the right tools. Still, Lyra said, smiling faintly, they'll tell stories about this day. He didn't argue. He activated the broadcast speaker, opening a channel to the villagers below. This village is safe. The monsters are gone. Help each other. Keep watch tonight. Then, lowering altitude, he brought the Apache toward the open field beyond the granary. Dust kicked up as the helicopter settled onto the earth. The rotors slowed but didn't fully stop. Lyra and Inigo stepped out into the cool afternoon air, boots crunching against blackened soil. Villagers cautiously approached, led by a gray-haired woman clutching a wooden cane. You saved us, she said, her voice trembling. Inigo nodded. We saw the smoke. We did what we could. You're not from the kingdom, another man added, eyes wide. Are you mercenaries? Lyra stepped forward. We are travelers. And protectors when needed. Children peeked out from behind barrels and crates. Some pointed at the Apache. Others stared at Inigo's gear, eyes gleaming with fascination. It's called a helicopter, Inigo explained. It flies. And it fights. The old woman bowed low. We have nothing to offer. But please stay for the evening. Let us thank you properly. Inigo glanced to Lyra, who nodded. Just one night, he said. Then we move on. That evening, the village square became a place of quiet celebration. Bread was shared. Stew was stirred in large pots. Makeshift tables were set with simple dishes, but they were offered with grateful hearts. Inigo sat near the edge of the crowd, eating slowly. Lyra sat beside him, her bow resting across her lap. You were right, she said softly. This machine, it's not just for war. It's for hope. He looked out over the people laughing, rebuilding, hugging. Yeah, he said. Sometimes that's enough. The village elder approached once more. We rebuilt this place 3 times, she said. Bandits, monsters, the frost. But we've never seen anything like that, like you. Whatever you are, wherever you came from. We're just passing through, Inigo said. We're just passing through, Inigo said. The elder nodded slowly, her gaze lingering on the Apache for a moment before returning to his face. Passing through or not, you saved our children, our future. That's not something we forget. Around them, the village had begun to hum with cautious life again. The fires had been put out, smoke rising in thin trails from blackened rooftops. Neighbors helped each other rebuild fences, douse embers, and gather the wounded. But the air wasn't heavy with mourning. It was threaded with relief, even joy. The people of this village had seen death and lived. By twilight, the town square was lit with lanterns. Some salvaged, some hastily hung from wooden beams and rope poles. What little food they could spare was brought forth. Roasted carrots and potatoes, flatbread warmed over hot stones, and spiced meat likely hunted from the nearby forest. It wasn't much, but it was shared with reverence. Inigo sat on a long bench made from old cartwood, his plate balanced on his knee. He watched as a small group of children chased each other around the base of the Apache, laughing and pointing every time they got near the cockpit. A few braver ones even touched the skids, treating it like the claw of a sleeping beast. Lyra returned from helping the cooks serve stew, brushing her hair back as she took her seat beside him. Her hands were stained with onion and smoke, and she had flour on her cheek. You helped them cook? He asked, raising a brow. I offered, she said simply. It's the least we can do. They're feeding us with what little they have left. He gave a nod, appreciating that. Lyra had always carried herself like a warrior, but here she was, ladling stew into bowls and helping set tables. Maybe it wasn't just her who was learning from him. Maybe he was learning from her too. A group of villagers raised their mugs toward the center of the square. Someone tapped a wooden spoon against a pot. The elder stood once again, leaning on her cane. Tonight we do not mourn. We give thanks, she said, her voice strong despite her age. To the gods, to fate, and to our 2 protectors who answered our cries from the sky. A cheer rose up, scattered and uneven, but full of genuine feeling. Someone shouted, to the Sky Riders. And another repeated it louder. Pub future ads. Inigo nearly choked on his bread. Lyra snorted. Sky Riders. I'm not correcting them, he said, holding up his hands. An elderly man walked up next, bearing a bundle wrapped in cloth. He bowed, then extended it to Inigo with both hands. This was made for my grandson. But he's gone now. Take it. Inigo hesitated, then unwrapped the cloth to reveal a finely carved dagger. Iron blade, horn handle, etched with what looked like protective runes. Simple but masterfully made. I can't accept this. You must, the old man said. If you saved my grandson, I would have nothing to offer. But because you didn't get here in time for him, I must give something anyway. There was no bitterness in his voice. Only solemn truth. Inigo accepted it with a nod and tucked the blade carefully into his belt. Other villagers stepped forward with humble gifts. Dried herbs, spare tools, a warm cloak stitched with the village's crest. A small girl gave Lyra a bracelet made of tiny river stones. Lyra held it in her palm like it was made of silver. Inigo leaned in. You're not crying, are you? I'm sweating through my eyes, she muttered. More laughter. More warmth. As night blanketed the valley, a fire was lit in the center of the square. Someone brought out a battered old lute and a younger woman began to sing. Her voice was light, weaving a story of forest spirits and night wolves, of lost kings and brave hunters. The melody floated through the air like wind over water. Inigo sat back and let the moment sink in. He'd seen war. He'd seen cities burn. He'd held friends as they died in his arms. But here, in this little nowhere village on a continent he couldn't name, a people who barely knew him had offered their last bowls of soup and blankets. The world didn't need high-tech weapons or drones or orbital satellites. Sometimes it just needed a man with fire and a heart still willing to care. I could get used to this, he murmured. Lyra turned toward him. Used to what? Being the good guy. She smiled, genuine and soft. You're always good. Just needed somewhere to show it. He didn't reply. Just watched the stars for a while. Eventually, the village elder returned, flanked by two men wearing patched armor and makeshift swords. Her expression had shifted, not grief or gratitude now but something graver. Purposeful. Inigo stood as she approached. Lyra followed his lead. The elder bowed once more, but this time it was more formal. Forgive me for speaking of business after celebration, but there is something else. Inigo raised an eyebrow. What is it? The morning sun spilled through the half-repaired shutters of the village hall, painting stripes of golden light over the wooden floor where Inigo and Lyra sat sharing a simple breakfast with the village elder and two of the more able-bodied hunters. The scent of smoked meat and herbs filled the air, but Inigo barely tasted it. His mind was already on the mission ahead. You're sure they came from the east? He asked, placing a half-eaten loaf back on his tin plate. The older man nodded. We've lost cattle and scouts to that side for over 2 weeks now. The woods get thicker there and the old hills rise. There's a ravine deep and narrow. That's where we think the nest is. No one dares go too close. No one needs to, Inigo replied. Just give us the coordinates as close as you remember. Lyra, sitting beside him, jotted notes with a piece of charcoal onto a rough map sketched by one of the villagers. She marked the river that curved around the base of the hills and the sloping forests thick with underbrush. The elder looked at them both with concern. You'll be going alone? The aircraft only fits 2, Inigo said, standing. And it's better that way. Fast, clean, and fewer people at risk. The villagers nodded solemnly. They had seen the might of the helicopter. They knew it didn't need a platoon to level an army. Just come back alive, the elder said. You saved us once. I'd hate to see such bravery lost in the wild. Inigo gave a faint smile. We don't plan on dying today. Within the hour, the Apache was prepped and ready on the open field. Its blades spun slowly at first, then picked up speed, slicing the morning air with mechanical rhythm. Lyra climbed aboard, securing her harness behind the cockpit. The villagers gathered once more, waving as the aircraft lifted into the sky. Dust kicked up in swirling clouds, grass flattening under the pressure. The children cheered, hands shielding their faces as the steel beast soared upward. From above, the village shrank to a cluster of rooftops amid green and gold. The forest lay ahead like a vast, rumpled blanket, full of secrets and danger. Inigo banked the Apache toward the east, following the ridgeline as the map directed. Lyra had the parchment spread over her lap, eyes darting between landmarks below and notations made in charcoal. "There's the bend in the river," she said, pointing. "And those rocky outcrops. We should be nearing the ravine." Inigo adjusted the heading slightly, switching the main screen to terrain scan mode. Heat signatures shimmered faintly across the display, but none strong enough to indicate large concentrations of creatures. Then a flicker. He narrowed his eyes. "Got something," he muttered. Lyra leaned closer. "What is it?" "Cluster of low-level heat. Small bodies. Dozens." He toggled the infrared overlay and zoomed in. What emerged was a jagged crevice cutting through the forest floor, hidden beneath a canopy of thick-leafed trees. It would have been almost invisible from the ground, perfect for a goblin den. And around it, movement. Dozens of figures, barely larger than children, swarming in and out of the shadows. "That's it," Lyra said with certainty. "That has to be the nest. I will get down." Inigo didn't respond immediately. He switched the armament system from standby to active mode. Hydropods online. Chain gun, loaded. Hellfire missile, 1 remaining. Fuel level, 72%. He exhaled slowly. All systems green. The Apache descended like a hawk from the sun. And Lyra used the opportunity to hop out from the Apache midair and landed gracefully to the ground. Branches swayed violently as the helicopter dipped beneath the treetops, hovering just beyond the ravine's edge. The rotors kicked up debris and frightened birds as Inigo stabilized the craft. Lyra readied her bow, even though she knew it was the Apache that would do the heavy lifting. Still, it felt wrong to go into battle unarmed. Inigo opened the targeting overlay, eyes flicking between blinking heat signatures and visible clusters of movement. Confirming hostile density. Over 40 in the area. Possible subnests underground. He tapped the trigger control. "Let's trim the numbers." Whoosh. The first Hydra rocket screamed into the center of the ravine, hitting with a thunderous boom. Smoke erupted into the trees and the ground split with the concussive force. Screeches rose from within, high-pitched and inhuman. "Here they come," Lyra called, pointing at figures scrambling out of the hole like angry ants. Goblins poured from the fissures, some armed with jagged blades, others with slings or crude bows. A few wore scraps of armor likely looted from past victims. They shrieked and pointed skyward, realizing too late what awaited them. Inigo didn't give them time to regroup. Brr. The 30mm chain gun fired in brutal bursts, cutting across the treetops and pulverizing the front line of goblins. Dirt exploded. Trees splintered. The clearing became a killing field. Still more emerged. One bold goblin launched a firepot upward, hoping to strike the hovering beast. It shattered mid-air, flames curling harmlessly in the wind. Inigo activated the side-mounted thermal camera. Several larger heat signatures appeared near the rear of the ravine. Den leaders, perhaps. "Let's see what you're hiding." He fired the remaining Hydra rockets in rapid succession. 2 to the back of the cave, 1 to collapse the main tunnel mouth. The blasts were deafening. A wave of smoke and dirt shot up, along with the agonized howls of buried creatures. Chunks of rock tumbled down, sealing the exits. The nest was being crushed from above and within. More goblins tried to flee into the woods. Lyra took her cue, raising her bow. "I'll cover the flanks." Her arrows flew, guided by years of hunter's instinct. One goblin took a shaft through the throat as it climbed a root. Another staggered backward, arrow in chest, only to be blown apart by a burst from the Apache's gun. Within 15 minutes, the ravine fell silent. No more movement. No more screeches. Just smoke, ash, and shattered earth. Inigo circled once, scanning for remaining signatures. "Looks like we got them all. Nest is neutralized." Lyra slumped in her seat, bow across her knees, chest heaving. "That was overwhelming." He nodded, eyes still scanning the horizon. "Let's mark the site for cleanup. If any survive underground, the next blast will finish them." As they ascended once more, Lyra looked down at the devastation. The collapsed tunnels, the bodies, the lingering black smoke. "They won't be raiding villages again." "No," Inigo said. "This nest is done." They turned the Apache back westward, toward the grateful village they'd left behind. And for once the sky seemed a little brighter. The sun was nearing its zenith when the Apache roared over the ridge and began its descent toward the village. From above, the fields looked calmer now. No smoke, no fire, just rows of tilled land and tiny figures that turned skyward as the shadow of the helicopter loomed over them. Lyra leaned forward in her seat, her braid blown slightly by the wind seeping in from the slightly ajar cockpit window. She watched as villagers emerged from their homes and the fields, pointing toward the sky, their hands shielding their eyes from the glare. Inigo brought the Apache into a gentle hover, then slowly lowered it onto the same grassy clearing they'd departed from that morning. The landing skids touched earth with a soft jolt, and the thrum of the rotors began to wind down. Dust curled up around the chopper, prompting a few villagers to step back before cautiously approaching. The elder was the first to arrive, supported by a young woman on one arm and a cane in the other. Her eyes scanned both of them, then the scorched tips of Lyra's arrows and the tired but firm look in Inigo's eyes. "You're back," she said with a mix of awe and relief. "And whole." Inigo nodded as he stepped down from the cockpit, helping Lyra dismount as well. "Mission's done. The goblin nest won't be bothering anyone anymore." A murmur ran through the gathering villagers, half disbelief, half overwhelming joy. "They were hiding in a ravine east of here," Lyra added, brushing soot from her cloak. "We collapsed the tunnels. We saw no survivors." The elder's eyes welled. She bowed low, trembling slightly. "You've saved us again. Truly we owe you more than we can ever repay." A round of cheers erupted from the crowd. Children ran up, stopping just short of the giant helicopter, while men and women clapped or bowed in respect. Some wept. Others simply placed their hands over their hearts, mouths whispering blessings. "We don't need a reward," Inigo said, raising a hand. "Just knowing this village will sleep safely tonight is enough." The elder smiled. "Even so, you must rest. You will not leave without one last meal under our roof." Inigo glanced toward Lyra, who gave him a small, exhausted nod. "We'll stay till morning. Then we head back to Alandra." The village feast was smaller this time, less celebratory and more a quiet, grateful gathering. Long tables were laid out in the square again, with baskets of flatbread, grilled root vegetables, and meat broth passed along between the people. A gentle fire crackled at the center, and woven lanterns swung from thin poles, their soft glow dancing across the faces of those gathered. Inigo sat with a wooden bowl in hand, the scent of lamb stew rich and spiced. His rifle lay beside his seat and Lyra sat across from him, her expression soft, almost serene. "Funny," she said, breaking a piece of bread. "When I was a child I used to think of adventurers as loud, boisterous folk who drank too much mead and swung swords at anything that moved. And now—" Inigo raised a brow, sipping from a clay mug. "Now I think they're tired people with too much weight on their shoulders, and too little sleep." Inigo chuckled. "That's fair." Children whispered from the edges, sneaking glances at them before darting away. A few brave ones pointed at the Apache, still parked like a sleeping beast in the clearing. One boy approached with a tiny wooden carving in hand. It was crude, blocky, but it bore a striking resemblance to the Apache, complete with thin sticks glued on as rotor blades. He held it out to Inigo with both hands. "For you," he said shyly. "I made it." Inigo accepted it, heart unexpectedly stirred. "Thank you," he said softly, studying the child's handiwork. "I'll keep it safe." The boy beamed, then ran back toward his friends. As the night wore on, the villagers began to retreat to their homes, one by one. The elder remained seated beside the fire, watching the flames with a tired, satisfied look. "You've done more than we ever could," she said. "We'll finish the rebuilding. And from now on we'll keep our watches sharper. But, do you think more will come?" Lyra shook her head. That nest was too large for it to be one of many. Goblins breed fast but not without food and territory. That one was it. "And if others do show up," Inigo added, "you'll have time to prepare. And allies in Alandra." The elder nodded, satisfied. "Safe travels tomorrow. May the wind guide you." The next morning dawned clear, the sky a soft canvas of pink and gold. The Apache stood ready, rotors still, dew clinging to its paint. Villagers gathered again to bid them farewell, quietly this time with handshakes and heartfelt thanks. As Inigo climbed into the cockpit, Lyra lingered a moment longer with a group of young girls, accepting a bundle of dried herbs and a woven bracelet. "You'd make a fine village guardian," one of them said. Lyra smiled. "I've got someone to watch over already." She jogged toward the Apache and strapped in behind Inigo. "Ready." The engines came alive. The blades spun faster and faster, until the familiar thrum returned and the chopper rose slowly into the morning air. Below them, the village faded into a patchwork of rooftops and waving hands. Then the fields. Then the ridges. Alandra lay to the west. The flight back was long but peaceful. The forests below stretched for miles, wild and free. Occasionally, deer darted through the underbrush and rivers shimmered like silver snakes in the sun. Lyra spent most of the trip leaning against her seat, eyes closed in contentment. Inigo kept the Apache steady, scanning the terrain more out of habit than concern. For the first time in days the sky felt calm. "Back to the city," Lyra murmured after a while. "Back to normal," Inigo replied. But neither of them truly believed it. They had seen what lay in the wilderness: goblins, monsters, ruins, and they knew their journey was only beginning. As the towers and bridges of Alandra finally came into view beyond the cliffs, Inigo exhaled. Home for now. The sun was nearly at its peak when the Apache crested the last ridge before Alandra. Inigo eased the aircraft into a slow hover, watching the distant towers of the capital glint beneath the sky like silver-tipped spears. He could see the city gates, the merchant caravans filing into the wide roads, and the smoke of cook fires curling from chimneys. Civilization again. It felt almost alien after the quiet wilderness and the chaos of battle. Beside him, Lyra was brushing wind-blown strands of hair from her face. "We're close. Are we flying it all the way in?" Inigo shook his head. "No. Can't risk drawing attention. This thing's loud and massive. I'd rather keep it under wraps." He opened his system interface, fingers tapping against the sleek console. A faint shimmer surrounded the Apache, pixelating around the edges as the entire helicopter dematerialized, vanishing into his inventory with a soft hum. Lyra blinked. Still not used to watching a flying war machine disappear like it's a magic wand. He smirked. "You'll get used to it. Now come on, we walk from here." They disembarked on a grassy plateau overlooking a forest trail that would lead to the city gates within the hour. The path was well worn by travelers and patrolled regularly by city scouts, so it was safe enough. Inigo slung his rifle on his back, pulling a cloth over it to avoid drawing stares, while Lyra adjusted her cloak to hide her gear. The walk was quiet at first, just bird song and the rustling of leaves. But Inigo found his mind wandering back to the village. The faces of the children. The old woman's trembling voice. The crackle of fire from the goblin raid. He couldn't shake the feeling that even though they'd won a battle, the war ahead was far bigger. "You think the guild will believe us?" Lyra asked, breaking the silence. "They'll believe Thorn," Inigo replied. "And we've got enough ash on us to prove we didn't spend the last few days sipping wine in a meadow." The gates of Alandra loomed soon after. The guards barely glanced their way, too used to seeing muddy adventurers return from near-death outings. Inigo flashed his registration tag and they were waved through without hassle. The streets of Alandra bustled with life. Merchants peddled herbs and weapons. Smiths hammered iron. A bard strummed a lute near the fountain plaza, and a group of young mages in training robes darted between spell towers on errands. Everything was normal. Too normal. They made their way to the Adventurers Guild on foot, climbing a wide avenue lined with cobbled stones and old lantern posts. The guild building stood proud near the city center, tall, imposing and carved with crests of various monster species. It was part hall, part fortress, with banners fluttering outside and bulletin boards filled with contracts by the main entrance. As they pushed through the heavy wooden doors, the familiar scent of waxed wood, roasted food and sweat greeted them. Tables were filled with adventurers mid-meal or mid-boast, weapons leaning against chairs and tankards sloshing with ale. Elise was behind the reception desk as usual, her blue uniform pristine, blonde hair tied into a high, efficient ponytail. When she spotted them, her eyes lit up. "You're back," she called out. "I was beginning to think the goblins had eaten you both." Lyra cracked a smile. "You know what happened?" "What are you talking about?" "I'm just saying random words," Elise replied. "Is Thorn in?" "He is. He'll want to see you right away." Something about updating the field records. Follow me. She turned on her heel, her boots clacking against the polished floor, and led them up the side stairs toward the administrative wing. The sounds of the hall faded behind them, replaced by the quieter, more serious atmosphere of the guild's upper offices. Guildmaster Thorn's door was slightly ajar, as if he had been expecting them. Elise knocked once and pushed it open. "They're here," she said. "Come in," rumbled a familiar baritone from inside. He looked up, expression unreadable, and gestured for them to sit. "You were gone longer than expected," he said. "There were complications," Inigo replied. "But the job's done." The goblin nest was located east of the village, buried deep in a ravine. Over 40 of them. We collapsed the tunnels with airstrikes. Confirmed no movement after a thermal sweep. Thorn's brow furrowed. "Airstrikes? Goblins? You meant to say that you took a quest from one of the villages." "Yes." Thorn grunted. "You're full of surprises." Lyra chimed in. "The village is safe now. They won't see another goblin raid for a long time, if ever." Thorn leaned back in his chair and closed the ledger. "Good. We've had too many smaller settlements overrun lately. Your actions may have saved more than just that village." He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "And the other matter?" Inigo's voice lowered. "Any word from the Lord of Destruction?" Thorn's jaw tightened, but he shook his head. "None. No sightings. No seismic activity. No reports of his minions stirring either." "That's strange," Lyra said slowly. "Agreed," Thorn said. "He's not the type to vanish. Either he's gathering strength for something large, or he's already watching us and waiting." Inigo didn't like either option. "If he's waiting, we can't afford to." "You think we should act?" Thorn asked. "We have little to no information about him. In fact, we would only act if he act. We can enter the rift, but rifts are not always guaranteed to lead us to a target." "You are goddamn right." After the meeting concluded, Inigo and Lyra descended the stone steps of the guild in thoughtful silence. The midday sun now cast longer shadows over the plaza, the hustle of Elandra still pulsing around them. They took a quiet path through the eastern quarter, winding past alchemy shops and bakeries until they reached Inigo's home. Inside, the air was still and familiar. Lyra dropped her cloak onto a hook while Inigo set his rifle gently by the wall. Neither spoke for a moment. Finally, Lyra said, "Home." Inigo nodded, exhaling. "For now, at least." A day later, Inigo stretched his arms as he stepped into the main room, clad in a loose gray tunic and dark slacks, far removed from his usual gear. His body ached in subtle ways, not from injuries but from fatigue, the kind that lingered in the bones after days of constant adrenaline. Behind him, Lyra padded into the room barefoot, her hair slightly disheveled, eyes still a little heavy with sleep. She wore a simple linen shirt over leggings, and despite her warrior's grace, she looked remarkably relaxed for once. "You're up early," she mumbled. "I don't think I ever fully slept," Inigo replied with a small smirk. "My brain still thinks we're on alert." Lyra yawned, dropping onto the cushioned bench beside the low table. "That's because we usually are." He nodded in agreement, then made his way into the modest kitchen section of the house. The shelves were neatly stocked. Some dried herbs, barley, bread, and a few fruits. But Inigo was looking for something more specific today. "I've been thinking," he said, running a hand along a small wooden spice rack. "We've been eating tavern stew and dry rations for days. It's time for real food." Lyra perked up. "You're cooking?" "Yeah," Inigo said, grinning. "Something from my world. A dish from my country. One of the staples. It's called adobo." "Adobo," Lyra repeated slowly, testing the word. "Is that a kind of stew?" "In a way, yeah," Inigo replied. "It's meat braised in soy sauce, vinegar, garlic, and spices. Served with rice. Simple, savory, delicious." Lyra leaned forward with interest. "That sounds amazing. And you know how to make it?" "I've cooked it plenty of times back home," he said. "I'll need ingredients though. Some of it I already have, but I'll need fresh meat, garlic, vinegar, and rice. Lots of rice." She smiled, eyes suddenly bright. "Then what are we waiting for?" By mid-morning, they were out on the streets of Elandra, weaving through the cobbled lanes of the city's bustling marketplace. The stalls were lively today, filled with the scent of freshly baked flatbreads, grilled meats, and sweet honeyed fruits. Merchants called out their wares and customers haggled animatedly beneath colorful awnings. Lyra kept close, occasionally brushing shoulders with Inigo as they moved from stall to stall. "This feels oddly normal," she remarked. "Shopping for food after a mission." Inigo nodded. "Normal's good. We need more of it." They stopped by a butcher's stall, where racks of fresh pork hung behind a glass pane. The butcher, a burly man with a red apron and a twirled mustache, greeted them with a nod. "Good morning. What can I get you?" "Half a kilo of belly cut if you've got it," Inigo replied. The butcher arched a brow. "Planning a feast?" "Something like that," Inigo said with a small grin. Once the pork was wrapped and tucked into Inigo's bag, they moved on to the spice merchant. A narrow stall lined with tiny clay jars emitted pungent scents of dried peppers, peppercorns, cumin, and more. Inigo asked for black pepper and bay leaves, close enough substitutes for his intended flavors. They also stopped for garlic, fat, purple-skinned bulbs that Lyra held to her nose with a curious sniff, and vinegar, which the merchant described as aged barley vinegar with a sharp bite. It wasn't cane vinegar, but it would do. Finally they found rice. A local farmer was selling sacks of short-grain white rice, which looked surprisingly similar to the kind Inigo knew. He bought a modest bag, enough for several meals. As they made their way back through the crowd, Lyra glanced at the contents of their hull. "All this for one meal?" she teased. Inigo laughed. "It's worth it. Trust me." Back at the house, Inigo set to work. He rolled up his sleeves, washed his hands, and arranged the ingredients across the counter. Lyra sat on the stool nearby, watching him with a curious gleam in her eyes. "You look so serious," she said. "Cooking's like engineering," Inigo replied, slicing the garlic with practiced efficiency. "Get the ratios wrong and everything breaks." He started by sautéing the garlic in a bit of oil, filling the kitchen with its sharp, inviting aroma. Then he added the pork, searing it until the edges browned and crackled. The sizzle was music to his ears. Next came the soy sauce and vinegar, poured with precise care. The scent shifted, sharper, deeper, richer. He dropped in bay leaves and cracked black peppercorns, then lowered the flame and let the pot simmer. Lyra had drawn closer, her nose practically hovering over the pot. "That smells insane," she said. "Like, salty, sour, meaty, and comforting?" "That's adobo," he said proudly. "The smell means it's working." While the stew simmered, he turned his attention to the rice. He boiled it carefully, explaining the importance of proper water ratio and not stirring too much. "Rice is sacred where I come from," he added. "We eat it with almost every meal." "And you said this is from your country?" Lyra asked. "Yeah. A place called the Philippines," he replied. "Tropical islands. Lots of rain. More beaches than cities." She tilted her head. "Doesn't sound like anything I've ever heard of." "I'm not surprised," he said. "It's not on this world's map." Her smile softened. "Then thank you for bringing a piece of it here." Once the rice was done and the adobo had thickened to a glossy dark brown glaze, he plated everything. A generous mound of steaming rice beside chunks of pork glistening with sauce. He slid the plate to Lyra first, then served his own. They sat together at the low table in the corner of the kitchen, the windows open to let the breeze in. Lyra scooped a small bite with her spoon, watching the steam curl up. And then she tasted it. Her eyes widened slightly and for a moment she didn't speak. Then, "Holy gods," she said with reverence. "That's incredible." Inigo laughed. "Told you. It's salty and tangy and rich but not overpowering. The meat is so tender. And the rice, why don't we eat more rice?" He watched her devour the rest enthusiastically. For the first time in a while, Inigo felt a weight lift, not from his shoulders but from somewhere deeper. He hadn't just shared a meal. He had shared memory, culture, something real. "This," Lyra said, pointing her spoon at him, "you're making again." He mock saluted. "Yes, ma'am." They finished their plates and washed up afterward, the kitchen still filled with the scent of garlic and vinegar. As the afternoon sun dipped low, casting amber light across the wooden floor, Lyra sat with her feet propped up and a warm mug of tea in hand. "I get it now," she said quietly. "Get what?" Inigo asked, slumping beside her. "Why you talk about your world the way you do. That food, it's not just food. It's a piece of something bigger. He nodded slowly. Yeah. That's exactly what it is. They sat there for a while saying nothing more. Just enjoying the quiet, the tea and the way the house smelled like a home. I'm going to introduce some to you tomorrow.